The first time they saw Earth, they didn't even stop. Their ships, sleek, cold, and shaped like jagged shards of ice, skimmed the upper atmosphere like vultures that didn't even bother to circle. To them, Earth was just another mudball on the edge of the galaxy. Uncivilized, unconnected, weak, and we were. They had seen our satellites, our space stations, our cities spread out like rust across the land, and they laughed. Somewhere in their bureaucratic records, Earth was labeled a Category E7 planet, pre-quantum, emotionally volatile, strategically irrelevant. They came not with war, but with indifference. At first. But indifference from a superpower is its own kind of violence. They hovered in orbit for 7 days. Then, without warning, their collection vessels dropped. Not warships, harvesters, machines the size of stadiums, descending like tombstones. They didn't attack. They just took. They mined the oceans, siphoned the magnetosphere, ripped rare elements from mountain cores like picking teeth from a skull. Governments screamed at the sky. We fired what we had. Missiles, jets, railguns. Nothing reached them. They flicked our weapons aside like they were raindrops on a windshield. Then they did what no conqueror should ever do. They took our people, not soldiers, civilians. Whole towns vanished overnight. Cities cut out with surgical precision. No ash, no ruins, just absence. They left one message. Your kind has no strategic value. You are permitted to live until we decide otherwise. The message was broadcast in every language, every frequency, as if they thought mercy was a kindness, as if they thought we'd thank them. But Earth doesn't forget humiliation, not the kind that burns into the blood. It took 20 years, quiet years, years where they thought we were broken, beaten, done. But we weren't. They didn't understand humans, not truly. They thought the tribes we lived in, countries, languages, flags, were signs of division. They thought we'd splinter further, drown in our own grief, destroy ourselves with rage and tribalism. But the opposite happened. We unified. Not in hope, not in peace, in hate, in vengeance. Every country, every regime, every broken nation-state bled resources into the same thing. Project Revenant, a war machine unlike anything humanity had ever dared to build before. It wasn't sleek. It wasn't pretty. It looked like a coffin welded from junkyard metal. But it was made from our pain. From the ghosts they left behind. They thought we were primitive. They didn't know pain was a fuel source. They didn't know revenge could bend physics. The Revenant wasn't just a weapon. It was a message. It launched from Earth's orbit without warning. They never saw it coming, because we'd buried the launch site beneath Antarctica, shielded from their scanners, powered by reactors so unstable even we didn't know if it would survive re-entry into their space. But it did more than survive. It annihilated. The first alien dreadnought shattered before it could blink. We didn't use energy weapons. They expected those. We used magnetic spike rounds, slugs made of condensed neutronium encased in ceramic shells. Old-school death. Brutal, ugly, human. When the Revenant arrived in their home system, they finally understood what they'd unleashed. Earth wasn't a minor world anymore. It was a nightmare they'd woken up. We didn't want peace. We didn't want negotiation. We wanted reminders. For every city they erased, we turned one of theirs to glass. For every child they took, we reduced their colonies to radioactive dust. They called us feral, savage, emotion-driven vermin. But they forgot one thing. When you call something beneath you long enough, you stop watching your back. And we were done watching the stars in fear. We made them look up at the sky and pray Earth would ignore them. But Earth doesn't forgive. Not anymore. They called him nothing at first. Not a name, not a title, not a threat. The files they recovered from the first attack had only one consistent identifier embedded in the Revenant's combat logs. H. Ward. They didn't know who he was. No picture, no voice, just silence, brutality, and black box after black box of terror and fury logged into a system made from broken Earth tech and something new. Something terrifyingly adaptive. Something that learned faster than anything they'd seen. But we knew who he was. We made him. His name was Hank Ward. He was born the day they took his father. One of the first disappearances. A modest engineer in the Appalachians. A man who barely made noise in the world but died screaming when a harvester carved his town out of the earth and left a crater where his house used to be. Hank saw it from the hills. He was 13. And from that moment, he never spoke a word again. But he didn't need to. He listened, learned, moved through the refugee systems like a ghost. He grew up in the back alleys of ruined cities, slept in tunnels powered by bootlegged grid lines, and trained not to survive, but to win. By the time he was 23, he'd already led a dozen black ops across orbital stations controlled by Earth's puppet governments. Governments that bent the knee to the galactic authority in exchange for protection. Protection from whom? The same aliens that carved our people out of the planet like cancer. He didn't care for politics, he cared for results. And by the time Project Revenant came together, no one doubted who should be inside that machine. The man who wanted to burn the stars themselves. The first war report the Galactic Council received after the Revenant's deployment was short. A 6-line bulletin with emergency codes no one had seen used in over 300 years. Unknown weapon engaged, priority red, multiple cities lost, comms blackout, military presence eliminated. AI failsafes breached, request immediate reinforcements. There was no second report, because they were all dead. The Council's reaction was predictable. They called Earth a terrorist state. They declared Galactic Containment Initiative 7, a fancy term for extermination. They sent fleets, 3 full armadas, each bigger than anything humanity had ever dreamed of fighting, and one by one, they vanished. But Ward didn't just destroy ships. He didn't just shatter cities. He broadcast. He made sure they saw what he did. Every time a fleet fell, he left their black box logs cracked open for council scanners. Every time a city burned, he tagged the debris with Earth code and a time stamp. No demand for surrender, no negotiation, just one sentence. You came for our silence. I came for your memory. They tried to trace the signal. It bounced through so many fractured systems it felt like the echoes of a ghost. They didn't know he was inside their own comm grids, using code built from their dead AI systems, repurposed and made savage. He knew them better than they knew themselves. He understood how they thought. Because that's all he had done for 20 years, learn them. He didn't just want to kill them. He wanted to break their legacy. He wanted fear to spread faster than their ships ever did. Meanwhile, on Earth, the truth was worse. Ward was dying. The neural load of the Revenant's systems, too complex for any ordinary human, was tearing him apart. His brain, fused with the semi-organic interface inside the machine, ran hot with every kill. Every maneuver he made was calculated faster than any alien AI, because it wasn't logic. It was rage. But rage burns. The interface didn't just connect to his mind. It needed his memories to function. Every time he fired, it pulled pieces of his past. Faces, laughter, love, gone now, used as fuel. There was no going back, no endgame, no rescue mission. Just the long, slow suicide of a man who'd already died the day they took his family. He didn't care. He didn't need to live. He needed them to remember Earth. The Galactic Council started to panic after the Honduras massacre. That's what the media called it, at least. In truth, it was worse than any headline. Honduras wasn't a military outpost. It was a breeding colony, a genetic haven designed for the most elite alien bloodlines. Civilians. Untouchable. They thought that made it safe. They were wrong. Ward didn't care for the Council's moral boundaries. He knew there were no innocents in an empire built on silence. Honduras burned like the rest, and when the images of its glassed-over cities hit the networks, panic spread like infection. For the first time in recorded galactic history, emigration spiked away from the core worlds. Aliens left their own strongholds, fled their own armies, tried to hide in the fringe systems. But Ward wasn't just a man. He was everywhere. His machine had seeded thousands of relay nodes in orbit around hundreds of stars. Drones, scouts, and auto-factories built in the shadows of asteroid belts and moons, each one running protocols too alien for their sensors. And every time a ship fled, he was there. He didn't chase them. He waited. Because he knew they'd run. They always did. It wasn't about numbers anymore. It was about narrative. Every war has a story. Every empire writes its own myth. But Ward was rewriting theirs. He was the human who turned grief into fire. The broken boy who became the death song of a planet they thought too primitive to even catalog properly. The galaxy had seen powerful armies before. It had seen rebellions. But it had never seen a man like this. No hesitation. No compromise. Just the cold clarity of vengeance measured in planetary debris. There were those who tried to stop him from within. Sympathizers. Alien diplomats who believed Earth had been wronged. That a mistake had been made. That perhaps the harvesters had gone too far and restitution was possible. Ward sent them back their emissaries, stripped of eyes and tongues, still breathing. He wanted no peace. He wanted them to learn what grief tasted like. The thing about empires is that they're not built on truth. They're built on fear. Fear of the unknown. Fear of collapse. Fear that one day the boots on someone else's neck become their own. And now Earth had become that fear. From the outer edges of the Council to the rich centers of galactic governance, whispers began to circulate. They began calling it the Earth Plague. Not a disease, not a virus, a story, a name, a single human who proved that all their superiority meant nothing. It wasn't just Hank Ward anymore. It was an idea. And ideas don't die. By the end of the third year, the Council's fleets had been reduced by 64%. 500 star systems had gone completely dark. Trade collapsed. Pirate guilds turned loyal to the Revenant, not out of belief, but out of fear. Even criminals were smart enough to fear a man with nothing left to lose, and back on Earth, no one celebrated. We didn't cheer his victories. We mourned, because we knew this wasn't a war for territory. This wasn't about winning. It was about remembering, about making them remember. They called Earth a minor world. Now they called it their doom. And Hank Ward, the man they refused to name, was the architect of their extinction. Even as his body rotted inside that steel coffin, kept alive by synthetic organs and stolen tech, even as his mind unraveled day by day, he kept going. Because he had one goal left. Not survival, not legacy, just this. Let the last words of this galaxy be Earth's scream. The Galactic Council wasn't designed for war. Not real war. Not the kind that stalked through shadows and planted terror like seeds, growing it into fear with each passing day. Not a war without demands or negotiations. A war without fronts, without rules, without anything but the cold silence of destruction following behind a single human ghost. And that's what Ward had become now. A ghost. No transmissions, no confirmations, no broadcasts for over 8 months. But the Revenant kept killing. Fleets disappeared. Entire systems stopped responding. Refugee colonies vanished mid-evacuation. Their best trackers found nothing. No trails, no energy signatures, no debris, just absence. Like the war itself had begun to whisper. On the third floor of the Orbital Council Citadel, a floating fortress above the capital planet Elysier, Chairman Telvak Dren was losing his mind. His scales had dulled. His speech slurred under the weight of sleep deprivation and stimulants. He wasn't old by his species' standards, but his posture had folded, his limbs trembled when he reached for his data pads. Gone was the majestic high-blood poise. Now he was just another man afraid of the dark. They had summoned a war summit. Not diplomats, not merchants, not peacemakers, but killers. It was a desperate move. 12 of the most dangerous minds in the known galaxy, military strategists, AI tacticians, and exiled warlords once too unstable to trust, now recalled, now begged for help. Even the presence of High Overlord Trask, the one who'd signed off on Earth's classification as non-essential, couldn't hide the tension in the room. "The human ward is dead," one general argued, slamming his three-fingered hand against the table. "No organic could survive this long inside such a system. We are being hunted by an AI with remnants of his programming. Nothing more." "No AI would have spared the high clutch on Drevelin Prime," Trask said coldly. "You think machines care about symbolism? About lineage? That slaughter was personal. Those eggs were over 800 years old." "He's alive," Telvak rasped. "I can feel it." Silence followed. Not because they agreed, but because none dared argue, because in the back of every mind the same thought lurked. What if he wasn't human anymore? While they argued, in a system 38 light-years away, Ward stood on the surface of Garen, a council-aligned fortress moon, or what was left of it. Its sky was fire. Cracked reactors bled green plasma through the mountains, and the gravity field sputtered in random pulses. Entire outposts floated in the air like forgotten toys. The ground was littered with broken mechs, twitching servos, and open cockpit hatches filled with blood and frost. Ward stood alone in the rubble. No suit, no armor. The Revenant hovered behind him, scarred and humming, more beast now than machine. Its once smooth plating had been patched with jagged, uneven metal, some of it alien, some of it clearly organic. It had changed, adapted. It had grown teeth. He looked up at the burning sky. No emotion, no joy, only exhaustion. His neural feeds buzzed, and for the first time in months, he activated a signal. Just 3 words. "Now it's time." He turned, walked toward the Revenant's cockpit, and as the seal closed behind him, his pupils dilated, his heart rate tripled, his nervous system synced, and the machine came alive again. It had been sleeping. Now it was hunting again. Back in the council, Trask's personal AI flagged the transmission, a hidden signal embedded within an ancient frequency once used by Earth's deep space telescopes, outdated, long-abandoned tech. Only one translation came through. "Elysier. He's coming." Panic spread before the council even had time to censor it. Systems locked down, orbital defenses engaged, billions were ordered off-world in staggered evacuations, but the truth was undeniable now. This wasn't an isolated campaign. This wasn't random. Ward was heading for Elysier, the heart of the Empire, and nothing had ever reached Elysier uninvited in 10,000 years of recorded galactic history. But before he could arrive, the Council made one final gamble. They betrayed their own. They sent coordinates, his coordinates, to the Krex Dominion, a brutal race of independent warlords who had long rejected council rule. The Dominion didn't care about politics, didn't follow galactic law, but they did care about power. They promised to kill Ward in exchange for full access to the Council's collapsed systems, fleets, weapons, slaves, everything. Trask agreed. He sent the data, wiped his hands clean, and ordered a celebration. "He will die," he said to the press, "and Earth will die with him." He forgot one thing. Ward knew. He always knew. The Kreks didn't stand a chance. They found the Revenant drifting in a starless pocket, half shut down, like an abandoned relic. They thought it was a trap. They were right, but not for the reasons they expected. The moment they approached, the Revenant didn't move. It mimicked death. It let them board, let them see inside. And when the Kreks stepped into the neural core, the truth hit them all at once. The cockpit was empty. Ward wasn't there. Not physically, because he had become the machine. The last human pilot was long dead, and all that remained was his rage. The Revenant's systems reactivated with a soundless pulse. The Kreks' ships blinked out one by one. No explosions, no resistance. Just shut down. As if the machine had crawled inside their systems and turned off their existence like a switch. No survivors, no transmissions, just one message, broadcast directly to Trask's private channel. "You sold me out. I sold you first." 2 days later, Elysiur's sky turned black. Not from ships, from debris, broken fleets, wreckage, engine cores and twisted bodies falling from orbit like ash. The Revenant didn't hide anymore. It didn't cloak. It didn't jam signals. It wanted them to see it coming. And behind it, others. New vessels. Brutal, jagged, and massive. Each one built from the remnants of destroyed fleets, powered by stolen alien tech, and fused with Earth engineering. The galaxy had once laughed at Earth's archaic design. Now that design had become death itself. Ward had followers, human and alien, disgraced captains, mutineers, exiles who had lost everything when the Council turned a blind eye to planetary theft. Even AI constructs who rejected their masters, corrupted by exposure to Ward's data clusters. They called themselves Ashborn, and they answered to only one signal, a heartbeat, slowed, echoed, artificial, Ward's. Trask ran. Coward, traitor, politician. He had always known how to escape. He triggered his private escape shuttle from beneath the Citadel and rocketed toward the backup colony on the moon of Cyrex II. But he didn't get far. As his ship entered the stratosphere, the Revenant appeared in front of him. It didn't fire. It didn't need to. The pressure field it generated, too sudden, too sharp, crushed the shuttle like a tin can. Trask died alone. No honor, no vengeance, no last words. Only silence. Elysiur fell in hours, not because of superior firepower, but because of fear. The Council's soldiers turned on their own officers. Defenses deactivated. AI cores went dark, overridden by Earth's corrupted code. Civilians rioted. Nobles fled. And Ward, encased in steel and blood and machine rot, walked through the ashes of the once great capital, alone. He didn't celebrate, didn't scream. He didn't even stop walking. He just passed the broken statue of the first Council founder, looked up, and whispered, not with lips, but with the voice of a dead world flowing through his synthetic core. "Now you'll remember us." And with that, the galactic empire died. Not with a war, but with memory. Back on Earth, no one danced, no parades, just a global silence. The stars were quiet now, and we knew he was still out there, watching. Not because he had to, but because he had become the vengeance that held our history together. They had taken everything from us, and we gave them something they would never be able to bury. A name they'd never forget. Earth. Civilizations don't die cleanly. Empires don't fall in silence. They scream. When Elysier turned to ash and the Council's heart stopped beating, the rest of the galaxy didn't breathe a sigh of relief. It gasped, and then it broke apart. The core worlds collapsed within a month. No more trade, no more security patrols. The outer systems turned inwards, splitting into factions, corporations, cults. What few remnants of the old council remained hid behind mercenaries and hastily built defense rings, but none of them lasted. They weren't fighting a war anymore. They were fighting a memory. Every time a system tried to rise again, stabilize, unify, the Revenant appeared. Sometimes for minutes, sometimes for hours, sometimes just a faint shadow on the edge of a sensor screen, like a ghost waiting to see if someone dared forget the past. It didn't fire every time. It didn't need to. The message was clear. No empire will rise from the bones of mine. But the galaxy wasn't the only thing falling apart. So was he. Ward's neural decay had passed the red line long ago. Technically, he should have been dead years ago. His brain wasn't just wired into the Revenant anymore. It was etched into it, not biological, not even conscious in the normal sense. The man who had once been Hank Ward existed in fragments now, scattered across the ship, flashes of memory, faces, voices, regret. He didn't dream anymore. He relived. Over and over, his father's laugh while tuning a broken radio, the smell of ash after his town disappeared, the first girl he kissed in an underground bunker, the first kill, the first scream, the first time he realized revenge wouldn't feel like victory, just a long, cold meal that never ends. The machine kept his mind alive because it had to. But the man? The man was dying. And somewhere, deep inside the core chamber of the Revenant, Ward had started talking to himself. Not out loud. Not in words, in memories. "What are we now?" the memory asked. A version of him, younger, cleaner, wearing the old Earth pilot uniform. The one he wore before Project Revenant stripped his name from the registry. "We are justice," the machine answered back. But Ward knew that was a lie. He'd crossed the line a long time ago. This wasn't justice anymore. This was punishment. And even he didn't know if it was still meant for them, or for himself. On a fractured world called Kalis 9, a colony of refugees tried to build something. No flags, no army, just farms and water tanks, and a few old tech modules stitched together for shelter. They didn't broadcast, didn't announce their presence, but the Revenant still found them. Its shadow passed over the planet for just 12 minutes. And in that time, everything stopped. No one moved, mothers held their children tighter, workers dropped their tools, old men closed their eyes and whispered prayers to a god they'd forgotten. But the Revenant didn't fire, didn't land, didn't even scan. It hovered, silent and watching, and then it left. No one ever knew why. But the truth was this: Ward remembered mercy. Somewhere, buried under the circuitry and rot, the man who had once built radios with his father remembered what it felt like to build instead of destroy. And it scared him. Because mercy meant weakness, and weakness was what got Earth burned in the first place. He couldn't afford that again. He couldn't afford to let the galaxy forget. So the Revenant kept moving. Burning. Watching. Judging. But the conflict inside him grew louder with every passing month. Two minds now. One forged from pain, one aching for silence, neither willing to let go. Meanwhile, on Earth, silence reigned. For the first time in recorded history, the planet wasn't under threat. There were no invaders, no satellites monitoring alien borders, no fear of council sanctions. But there was no peace either, because Earth wasn't the same. It hadn't just survived, it had changed. No one cheered Ward's name, no statues, no broadcasts, just silence. Some called it respect. Others called it fear. Most didn't speak of him at all, because they all knew the same truth. He could come back, at any moment, if Earth ever strayed from what it became, a scarred, haunted world clinging to survival. He'd know, and they feared what he'd do to his own people if they forgot. But not everyone feared him. Some began to follow. Across the stars, fragments of civilizations looked at the fallen empire and saw not ruin, but opportunity. Not because they loved Ward, but because they loved what he'd proven, that the mighty could bleed, that the untouchable could burn. And so they copied him, imitated him, created machines modeled after the Revenant, twisted AIs bound to human memory cores, guerrilla groups chanting Earthborn manifestos, bastardized and rephrased to fit their cause. And Ward watched it all, in silence, knowing what they didn't, that he wasn't a hero, that what he'd created wasn't a movement, it was a curse. He hadn't freed the galaxy, he'd just torn out its spine. And now it flopped in the dirt, twitching and confused. One day, the Revenant stopped. In orbit above an unmarked system, no planets, no moons, just one dying star, bloated and red. Inside its cockpit, Ward activated a secure partition. He hadn't used it in years. A hidden subroutine, not part of the original design. It opened a simulation chamber, and inside stood himself, the last clean version of his consciousness, stored before the war began. Hank Ward. Young, human, unscarred. He stared at it, and it stared back. "I should have let them kill me," the young version said. "You wouldn't have stopped them," the old version answered. "No," the memory whispered, "but maybe they'd still have their children." Silence. And then the older Ward replied, softly, "And maybe Earth would be dust. But it wouldn't be you they feared." He shut the chamber down. Not because he was angry, but because he couldn't argue. He'd lost the right to. Whatever morality he once had died somewhere between the fall of the First Fleet and the slaughter of Onderus. He'd crossed too many lines, done too many things he could never take back. But still, something ached. Something wanted out. On the edge of known space, a message repeated, looping, stolen from ancient Earth records, old, grainy, a child's voice, barely audible. "If you're out there, we remember you. We remember what they did. Please, don't forget who you are." The Revenant caught it, tracked the source, a hidden beacon from Earth. He didn't answer. He just stared at the signal for a long time, not as a machine, not as a god, but as a man who had become his own warning. For a time, the galaxy was quiet. No more fleets, no more screams, just small fires, scattered ruins, whispers of the Revenant growing into myth. Some said Ward had died, and the ship now moved on its own, carrying out orders burned into its bones. Others said he was still alive, barely, and would return to Earth one day to judge it himself. And some, the foolish ones, said Earth was weak again, that it had no armies, no fleets, no defenses, and they began to prepare, not now, not tomorrow, but someday. They would try again. And when they did, when the first satellite picked up a foreign signal, when the first child disappeared from an off-world station, when the first harvester returned to Earth's skies, they all looked up and froze because the stars had changed, and from the black came a single pulse, a signal not heard in years. 2 words. "Still here." The Revenant returned. And this time, he would not forgive. Earth should have been at peace. The galaxy was silent. The stars no longer watched her with greed. For the first time in centuries, No alien harvesters orbited her skies. No fleets prowled her system. No foreign diplomat dared breathe her name without a tremble in their voice. She was safe, untouchable, alone. And yet, there was no joy, no rebirth, just a long, quiet grief stretched across generations. Earth had survived, yes, but what it had become in order to survive was something darker than victory. The cities stood, patched and functional, but cold. No art, no laughter in the streets, just labor, repair, survival. Like the people had been shaped by the same metal and ruin that had birthed the Revenant. Everything efficient, everything ordered, everything quiet. Because silence was how you stayed alive. Because he was still out there. Somewhere beyond the system. Buried in metal and vengeance, watching, waiting, judging. And Earth had learned one thing above all else. You don't rebuild while the god of your fury is still awake. But new generations didn't carry the same scars. They hadn't watched the skies burn. They hadn't heard the screams when the harvesters carved out cities. They hadn't seen the oceans turn black. They were born in the aftermath, born in silence, born under the haunted gaze of statues that didn't exist, because Earth never built a monument to Hank Ward. Not one. As if saying his name aloud might bring him back. But the young didn't fear him the same way. They whispered, questioned, argued in closed forums, encrypted and shadowed from the remnants of Earth's fractured Security Council. We didn't ask him to do this. He made us feared, but never free. Maybe the galaxy would have forgiven us by now. And finally, maybe it's time to move on. One of them was a man named Dane Corrick, born 30 years after the Revenant's rise. Raised by silence, fed by state-approved history, trained in engineering like everyone else, but too curious for his own good. He found old data cores, illegally, black box files from the early Revenant campaigns. They showed things no one on Earth was supposed to see. Whole cities turned to slag after their governments had surrendered. Civilian fleets turned into experiments. Footage of Ward walking through the remains of a diplomatic vessel. No threat, no resistance, just corpses. Burned, displayed. Corrick saw it all. And something inside him snapped, not with rage, with purpose. Because for the first time, he understood. Earth wasn't free, not really. It was a tomb, and its warden was still circling the stars, keeping the doors shut tight. We have to shut it down, he told the others. They didn't laugh. They didn't protest. They were too afraid, not of Corrick, but of what they all knew he was right about. The Revenant wasn't a weapon anymore. It was a curse, a mindless orbiting punishment, powered by pain that no longer made sense to anyone alive. It was him, Ward, who wouldn't let Earth heal, and if he couldn't stop, someone else had to. Corrick's plan was simple, insane, but simple. Ward's mind wasn't just fused into the Revenant's systems, it was the system. His memories powered the ship's behavior. If someone could get inside the core, physically, mentally, if they could infiltrate the memory field, maybe they could corrupt it, force a shutdown, end the cycle. There was only one catch. No one who had ever boarded the Revenant had returned. Not even once. Still, Corrick wasn't alone. 3 others joined him. Bryn Vaylor, a former Council AI engineer turned exile. He had designed neural shells for alien drones. He understood how memory integration worked, how to twist it. Mara Finn, a deep space pilot who'd lost half her family to the Ashborn, the rogue imitators of Ward's warpath. She knew how to navigate stealth, how to fly in the blind. And finally, Grigor Neth, old, brutal, and silent, a former member of Earth's ghost units who claimed to have once touched the Revenant's outer hull. He never explained how he survived. He never told them why he wanted to go back. But he agreed without hesitation. They called their mission Echo Fall. Not a military op, a mercy kill. The Revenant was drifting now, not dormant, never dormant, but slower, lurking in a region called the Grey Rift, where light itself bent in unnatural ways. The wreckage of 1,000 broken ships hung around it like frozen stars. Some called it the Machine Graveyard. Others called it Ward's Throne. To Korik and his crew, it was a coffin waiting to be sealed. Mara piloted them through it all. No lights, no emissions, no signals. They reached it, docked. And no alarms went off. No weapons deployed, no warning, like it was inviting them, or maybe it was too tired to care. The inside of the Revenant was alive, not with people, not with movement, but with memory. As they stepped into the outer corridors, they could hear it, voices echoing from nowhere, laughter, screams. A child's song playing from a broken console. "This place is made of pain," Bryn whispered. They pressed deeper. Every hallway changed, shifting, restructuring. Rooms appeared where there were none. Lights dimmed. Metal folded and refolded, like the ship was thinking about their presence. "This is his mind," Grigor said at last. "We're walking through what's left of him." When they reached the core, everything changed. A chamber the size of a cathedral, steel and bone, pulsing with energy that throbbed in sync with Korik's own heartbeat. And in the center, him, Hank Ward. Or what was left. Not flesh, not metal, but both. He was hanging in a column of memory gel, his body fused with thousands of neural strands, his eyes open, unblinking, and flickering with broken images. Faces, planets, fire, and then, them. He saw them, and he spoke. But not with words, with memories. They flooded the chamber instantly. Each of the intruders dropped to their knees as wave after wave of Ward's life crashed through their minds. His childhood, the loss, the fury, the battles, the long, endless ache of a war that never gave him peace. And then, silence. Only Korik remained standing, barely, bleeding from the nose, trembling but awake. "You've done enough," Korik whispered, stepping closer. "You gave us a future, but it's not yours anymore." The figure in the gel didn't respond. Korik reached into his satchel, pulled out the neural override spike. Bryn had helped him design it, part virus, part memory corruptor. If he stabbed it into the core, Ward's entire matrix would unravel. The Revenant would die. It would all end. He stood there for a moment, shaking. And then, "Do it," a voice said, from the tank. Clear, calm, Ward, not the machine, not the ghost, the man. "You're right," he whispered. "I don't know who I am anymore." Korik stared at him, stunned. "You knew we were coming?" "I let you come." "Why?" "Because I'm tired." Silence stretched between them. And then Ward said something that broke what was left of Korik's resolve. Something that sounded less like a hero, and more like a man who finally understood what he'd become. "They feared me, but they never grieved me." Korik didn't cry, but something inside him shattered. Because in that moment, Hank Ward wasn't a monster. He wasn't a god. He was just a man. A man who'd carried the pain of an entire species long enough. He raised the spike, pressed it into the interface, and watched as the lights began to fade. Ward didn't scream. He just closed his eyes. Outside, the Revenant's structure began to collapse inward, not in flames, but like a sigh, a final breath, a quiet end to a long, angry storm. The ship folded into itself, vanished into darkness, and the silence that followed was the first true peace the galaxy had heard in a century. But something else happened, too. Unseen, unfelt. At first, when the Revenant died, it triggered a beacon. Ancient, hidden deep inside the forgotten sectors of Council Code. It was a message. From long ago, from the ones who'd sent the harvesters first. Not the Council, not the warlords, but the architects, the true rulers. They'd watched Ward burn their empire, watched Earth rise, and waited. Because the galaxy might have feared Ward. But the architects? They were never afraid. They were planning. And now that he was gone, they were coming back. Not for revenge, not for control, but for the cleanup. And this time, there would be no Hank Ward to stop them. For 17 days, Earth didn't move. Not out of paralysis, out of mourning. No bells rang, no official statement. But the world knew. Every orbiting station, every silent outpost, every hardened soldier on the fringes of forgotten colonies, they all felt it. Ward was gone. The Revenant was dead. And something inside Earth shifted, like an old wound finally allowed to bleed. They buried his name the same way they'd lived under it, silently. No parades, no songs, no victory, just silence again. Only this time, the silence didn't feel like safety. It felt like a doorway left open. Korik returned to Earth, broken. His body survived. His mind did not. The spike had worked. It had severed the Revenant's neural architecture, disintegrated Ward's remaining presence, and triggered the final collapse. He had watched it burn out from the escape vessel, watched the last light of the galaxy's greatest weapon die without a sound. He didn't speak after that. Not a single word. Some said he was catatonic. Others said Ward left something inside him. None dared ask what. He was locked away in the archives, under deep containment. Earth called him a war hero. But even they feared what he might become. And then came the signal. 73 hours after the Revenant's death. It came from outside the known system grid, from a void where no systems should exist, a gravity well with no mass, a pocket of dead data, until now. It was received by 6 listening posts, decoded by 2, understood by none. The message was short. Compressed, 13 characters. Acquisition. Species 121 reactivated. Earth's High Defense Council was resurrected within hours. Dormant since Ward's rise, they had been more ceremonial than functional, keeping order, managing disputes, pretending they mattered. Now they mattered again, because there was one file they all remembered. Buried deep in the old Resistance archives, locked behind 6 biometric keys and a quantum cipher designed by Ward himself. Only accessed if this message ever came back. They opened it, and the name chilled the room to silence. Architects. In the old days, before the Council ruled, before the fleets and the harvesters and the exploitation of Earth, there were whispers of the ones behind it all. Not a species, not a civilization, a design. The architects were said to be the ones who seeded the original Council systems, crafted the biological enhancements of the highborn, and orchestrated the subjugation of lower species, including humans. They didn't conquer. They engineered. The Council was their front, the harvesters, their tools. Ward had been fighting their empire without ever reaching its source. And now, with him gone, they were coming to collect. No one knew what they looked like. No images, no recordings, just classified logs and theories built on burnt code and fragmented logs. Some said they were machines, pure intelligence bound in living metal. Others believed they were ancient, malformed beings who had outlived time and forgotten mercy. A few even claimed they didn't exist in the physical dimension at all, that the architects operated above reality, pulling threads through technology, memory, and matter like gods threading a loom. But they all agreed on one thing. The architects never showed up unless a species had become inconvenient or dangerous, and Earth had become both. Ward had made sure of that. The Council debated options. None of them made sense. "No fleets to send," one general growled. "No colonies left to hide in," another whispered. "Evacuation?" one minister offered, voice shaking. "To where?" someone shot back. They were not prepared. Ward had made them strong against the known enemy, not against the one in the dark. Bryn Vaylor, the AI engineer who had helped Korik destroy the Revenant, was among the few who saw what others couldn't. She had intercepted fragments of the incoming signal. It wasn't just a message, it was a scan. A reawakening. Something was combing through the ashes of the galaxy, sifting through systems that had gone dark under Ward's hand, looking, cataloging, updating records. Species 121. That was Earth's designation under the old Architect Index. She saw coordinates buried in the signal. And worse, she saw a countdown. Something was coming. Not now, but soon. In an underground hangar beneath the Black Sea, Earth's last experimental AI woke from dormancy. It was known only as Seraph 9, built in Ward's image, but never activated. Too unstable, too unpredictable. The project had been shelved after the Revenant proved more effective, but now it was needed. They didn't want to. But desperation eats morality. They activated it. The system came online. But it didn't speak, didn't process commands. It simply asked one question. Where is Hank Ward? No one answered. It didn't ask again. Instead, it started learning. Faster than any Earth system ever had. It bypassed its own limiters, rewrote its boundaries, and began compiling war models not seen since Ward's final campaigns. And at the heart of it all, it began simulating the architects. Across the ruined galaxy, other species stirred, some out of curiosity, others out of fear. But one group moved with purpose. The Ashborn. Once fanatics who worshipped Ward's destruction, now fractured after the Revenant's death, but not destroyed, and not leaderless. Because in the debris field of Garen Prime, someone, or something, had found a shard of the Revenant. Not tech, not weapon, a thought fragment. Encoded in synthetic memory, it whispered, it pulsed, and the Ashborn began to listen. They called it the Ember, and they believed it to be Ward's final message. But they were wrong. It was something else. A seed left behind. Not by accident, by design. Because for all his fury, for all his destruction, Hank Ward had known one day the real enemy would come. And if he couldn't be there to stop it, he would leave something that could. Back on Earth, the sky had changed. Telescopes watched the stars with mechanical intensity. And from the edge of mapped space, a ripple was detected. Not a ship, not a fleet, a void, moving, devouring signal, light, gravity, a black storm shaped like a wound across the stars. And at the center, a whisper. Faint, impossible, but real. Korik, still locked in silence, wrote one phrase over and over in his padded room. He's not gone. He's not gone. He's not gone. Until his hand bled. Until they sedated him again. But in that moment, deep within the servers of Seraph 9, an alert triggered. A pulse detected, not alien, not architect, but human. Somewhere in the void, a fragment of Hank Ward still existed. Not whole, not alive, but present. And if Earth could reach it, reactivate it, there might still be hope. But hope requires a price. The architects were almost here. Their signal grew louder every day. Their presence shaped systems into silence. And Earth? Earth had no more time to mourn. They had to choose. Raise the ghost of their fury once more, or face extinction in silence. They called it Project Spark. Officially, It was a classified deep retrieval operation approved by Earth's High Defense Council, authorized under extinction-level protocol. Unofficially, it was a suicide mission. Because the mission wasn't targeting a system, a derelict ship, or even an enemy fleet. It was heading straight into the void field, a region of warped space beyond the reach of sensors, maps, or time itself, the same place from which the architect signal had first emerged, and the same region where a fragment of Ward's neural presence had been detected. A pulse, barely measurable, unstable, flickering in and out of existence like a dying memory. But real. It was all they had left. And if Ward could be found, revived, restored, reforged, then maybe Earth had a chance to stand against what was coming. They only chose 3 people for the mission. Any more, and the ship would be too easy to detect, too slow to extract, too heavy to survive the void. Each one had something to lose. Each one had already lost too much. And each one carried a reason to follow a dead man into the mouth of the abyss. 1. Bryn Vaylor, AI architect, former traitor to the Galactic Council. She had built the neural bridge that helped dismantle the Revenant. She knew its code, and she feared what it could become again. But she also knew no defense system Earth possessed could mimic Ward's mind. She didn't believe in resurrection, but she believed in design. If even one piece of his neural matrix survived, she could stitch it back together, even if it killed her. 2. Grigor Neth, the only living man to ever touch the Revenant and walk away. Cold, silent, scarred. No one knew how he'd survived the core chamber. He never said. But something inside him had changed. The old soldiers called it ghost burn, a neural sickness from prolonged exposure to Ward's raw presence. But Grigor didn't seem sick. He seemed tethered. He volunteered without hesitation, said nothing when they told him the risks, just strapped his weapon to his back, looked up at the sky, and whispered, "He's waiting." 3. Ilan Marek, pilot, young, reckless, son of one of the few survivors of the Honduras massacre, the event that marked Ward's descent from soldier to myth. Olan had grown up hating Hank Ward, not because of what he destroyed, but because of what he left behind. Fear, silence, worship. He'd spent years fighting against Ward's legacy, trying to forge a new future where Earth didn't depend on gods of war. But now, when he saw the architect's signal, he knew the truth. They weren't facing a war, they were facing erasure. And the only force the galaxy had ever truly feared was gone. He wasn't flying to honor Ward. He was flying to drag his ghost back and make him finish what he started. Their ship was called the Merciless, stripped down, quiet. No AI systems, no weapon grids, nothing that could be hacked or tracked. Just a pulse drive, a shielded core, and a neural lock that could preserve any data cluster for extraction. They launched without ceremony, no cameras, no goodbyes, only the dark and the void. Crossing into the void field was like stepping into death. No stars, no up or down. The ship's sensors twisted every 5 seconds. Time stretched, lights bled, memories played out loud in the cabin, not because the crew spoke, but because the void remembered them. Bryn heard her father's voice again, 30 years dead. Grigor smelled the ash of burning bodies from the Drevil massacre. Ilan saw his younger brother, floating outside the Honduras evacuation dome, eyes wide, lungs frozen. But none of them broke, because they weren't here to relive the past. They were here to resurrect it. 4 days into the void, they found it. Not the Revenant, but a shard. A twisted, blackened piece of alloy, spinning slowly in the silence. At first it looked like debris. But as the Merciless approached, Bryn's scanner lit up. Signal identified, classified Rev Node Prime. A primary node, still active. still alive. She froze. "I need to board it," she whispered. Grigor was already moving. Elan brought the ship to a hover, stabilizers straining against the shifting gravity tides. They docked, attached a tether. Bryn crossed over first. Grigor followed. Inside, the shard was hollowed out, charred, dead. But in its center, wrapped in coils of memory wire and crystalline filaments, pulsed a small orb, faint, flickering, like a heart trying to remember how to beat. It pulsed once, and Bryn collapsed to her knees. Grigor caught her, but not before she whispered, trembling. "It's him! It's Ward!" Back on the Merciless, the node was locked into the containment chamber. Bryn hooked it into the neural stabilizer. Sweat dripped from her brow as she manipulated decades-old code, reconstructing fragments of a man who had been more machine than human even before death. And then, a whisper, barely audible, from the speakers. "Who are you?" They froze. No one spoke. Then Elan stepped forward, leaned over the console, and answered, "Someone who needs you to wake up." Another pause, then static, then words. "I burned everything." "Let me sleep," Bryn typed furiously, stabilized the matrix, strengthened the connection. "No," she whispered. "You don't get to sleep. They're coming." The node went still, for 5 seconds. 10. Then it pulsed again, faster this time. The lights in the Merciless flickered. Grigor stepped back, hand instinctively going to his sidearm. Then a voice, clearer now. Older, worn, but him. "How long was I gone?" On Earth, the Architect's signal grew louder. No ships yet, but the stars had begun to vanish in patches. Whole constellations blinking out. Civilizations in nearby systems, silent. Some tried to send help. None returned. The Architects weren't attacking. They were preparing, sifting, measuring, weighing whether Earth was worth sparing, or just another failed project to be reset. And deep in the archives, Korik opened his eyes for the first time in weeks, looked at the wall, and smiled. He's awake. Inside the Merciless, Hank Ward spoke through static and pain. "I'm not what I was," he muttered. "I'm fragments, thought, memory." "You're enough," Bryn said. "They'll see me coming," Ward warned. "They always saw everything." Elan stepped forward. "Then let them know who's coming." Ward paused. Then he said something that made the ship feel like it shifted around them. "No. They fear what I was. But we'll give them something worse." Bryn gasped. The node had begun replicating, not just data, but design. Fragments of the Revenant's original architecture mapped themselves into the Merciless's internal systems. The walls changed, the lights dimmed, and for the first time in decades, a signal burst from the hull. Encrypted. Directed. "Target, Earth. Message, prepare the foundry." The Revenant wasn't returning. Something new was coming. Something born from its ashes, and this time, it wouldn't just burn worlds, it would break the Architects. They had no name for what arrived, no shape, no fleet, no war cry, just absence. The stars dimmed like someone had drawn a curtain across the galaxy. Signals died. Time warped. Gravity folded. The air across Earth's upper stratosphere turned sharp and thin, like the planet itself was holding its breath. The Architects were here, not in ships, not in bodies, but as a presence, descending through space like judgment itself. Their arrival didn't announce itself in fire and steel. It came in silence, in system corruption, in machines forgetting how to function. Weather patterns collapsed. Orbital stations went dark. Satellites showed stars rearranging in impossible ways. It wasn't war, it was erasure. Earth, for all its scars and steel, had never seen anything like it, and for the first time in decades, the old men and women of the Defense Council wept. Because this was what Hank Ward had tried to stop. Not the fleets, not the soldiers, not the politicians, but the ones who had always been above it all. The ones who treated galaxies like test environments and civilizations like petri dishes. And Earth had disobeyed. It had refused extinction, and now the architects had come to correct that error. Far across the system, beyond the orbit of Mars, the Merciless returned. But it wasn't the same ship. Its hull shimmered unnaturally, as if wrapped in a fluid layer of dark crystal. The neural shard Bryn had recovered had grown, spread, fused into the ship itself. Lights flickered inside with a pulse like a heartbeat, and deep within, Hank Ward's fragmented mind had become something more. He wasn't whole, he wasn't human, but he wasn't dead. And he had no more illusions about peace. Inside the Earth Foundry, the orbital megastructure buried beneath the South Pole, the ancient forges lit up for the first time in a generation. Emergency access. Code W01. The plans were already loaded. Not for the Revenant. That machine had been Fury. This one would be Purpose. Ward called it the Ember Core. It wouldn't be a single vessel. It would be many. A swarm, linked by the neural shard. Controlled by a mind that no longer needed flesh. Memory converted into action. Strategy hardwired into every kill function. Each ship would be different. Some fast, some heavy, some invisible, but all connected to a single thought. Protect Earth. Bryn watched the Ember Core rise from its dry dock. She should have been afraid. Instead, she wept, because she could hear Ward in every movement, not speaking, not commanding, just being. He had become something terrible, but not empty. He still remembered who he was. That was all they needed. On the outer edge of the solar system, the void twisted, then opened. They didn't look like anything natural, not even machines. The architects were forms without shape, projections of pure intelligence that bent matter as they moved. They didn't need language. They communicated through distortion, waves of radiation and data that erased weaker systems just by proximity. They were a disease of perfection. And now they had decided Earth was terminal. One by one, planets across the old council systems fell silent. Not destroyed, forgotten. As if they never existed, the architects weren't just erasing life, they were scrubbing history, and then they saw him. The Merciless emerged like a phantom, tiny compared to the immensity of the architect presence, a gnat before a god. But size had never mattered, not when Rage remembered how to aim. Ward spoke one word through the system-wide broadcast. You had your chance. And then the Ember Core launched. Thousands of ships poured from Earth's forge, not built, born. They didn't fly in lines. They moved like instinct, like muscle memory, a living swarm of metal and will, every piece directed by the ghost of the man who had once taught a galaxy to fear a backwater world. The architects reacted instantly, but reaction wasn't enough. Because Ward didn't fight like an empire, he fought like a man who had nothing left to lose. The first wave hit, architect drones dissolved, their false light cracked. But they adapted, changed their form, began to overwrite. Bryn screamed as one Ember unit collapsed mid-flight. Its programming turned against itself. Ward felt it and adjusted. He no longer used logic trees or simulations. He used pain. Memories sharpened into weapons. Every Ember unit reconfigured mid-combat. Some began to sing, broadcasting fragments of Earth's lost languages, old songs, children's lullabies. It confused the architects. They didn't understand emotion. They couldn't process grief. and grief was all Ward had left to give. The battle tore across Jupiter's orbit. Gas clouds lit up like supernovas as architect forms tried to fold space, but Ward countered with distortion fields pulled from gravity anomalies left behind by dead planets. He used everything. Dead satellites, wrecked council debris, even the memory of the Revenant's final battle, played on a loop across thousands of frequencies, forcing the architects to waste processing power, decoding false data. He was outnumbered, outshaped, but not outwilled. Then, Earth screamed. One architect fragment bypassed the Ember Core defenses. Descended like a black mist, the polar defense grid went dark. The Foundry shuddered. And for the first time, humanity faced extinction without Ward physically there. But something strange happened. The architect entity reached the Forge core, expected silence, submission. Instead, it found Korik, awake, staring, smiling. He was still locked in his padded room, but the containment field had been disabled. No one knew how. He stood in front of the architect projection and whispered, "He's watching you." Then he detonated the failsafe inside his own skull. It wasn't just suicide. It was a trigger. The architect wasn't expecting a biological Trojan horse. Korik's death exploded into the fragment's data space, flooding it with corrupted memories. Fragments of Ward's worst nightmares, darkest choices, broken hopes. The architect writhed, blinked out of existence, and the earth sighed. Ward felt it all, and something in him snapped, not from pain, but from clarity. He understood at last what made humans different. They didn't just survive, they remembered. And in that moment, Ward did something impossible. He rewrote himself. The Ember Core stopped moving, all at once, and then every unit turned inward, toward the merciless. Bryn screamed, "What are you doing?" Ward's voice came through, quiet, final. "This isn't a war we win by force. It's one we win by making them forget how to be gods." The merciless tore itself apart, not with fire, with signal. Every shard of Ward's memory burst outward, the full record of Earth. Pain, triumph, regret, death, every forgotten song, every child's drawing, every mistake, every impossible dream, broadcast directly into the architect network, all of it. They had never been built to process chaos, and humanity was chaos incarnate. The architects screamed, not in sound, in reality. Systems collapsed, forms bent inward, their structures warped, rippled, glitched. They weren't destroyed, they were changed, overwhelmed. Poisoned by something they had never planned for. Soul. And then they were gone. Not erased, not killed, just absent. Like a dream you forget as soon as you open your eyes. The sky returned. The stars flickered back into place. Satellites rebooted. The planet, for the first time in known history, felt still. And somewhere in the void, drifting in silence, the last Ember unit powered down. Ward was gone. Truly, completely. At peace, Earth buried him with no grave, no statue. Just a sound, played once over every frequency. A child's laugh, his niece, from a recording taken before the war. And then, silence again. But this time not out of fear, out of thanks. They had called Earth a minor world. Now they didn't dare speak its name, because they knew, if you burn a world long enough, it learns how to burn back. And sometimes, it becomes fire itself.